Manners from Heaven, A Divine Guide to Good Behavior by Quentin Crisp with John Hofsess. Chapter 10, Designs for Living. Opening quote. Everything that can be thought at all can be thought clearly. Everything that can be said clearly. Ludwig Wittgenstein. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. If I were to live my life over again, even though I have committed no crime that deserves the punishment of reincarnation, I would create a new profession, manners consultant. Such an occupation would suit me well. I could just be and talk. I would offer my advice to engineers and architects, so that when they build a new airliner or design a new shopping plaza, it would be built in a way that is conducive to good manners by its future users, rather than being a hindrance to politeness, as one so often finds in the social planning that exists today. It is an old maxim that man shapes his buildings, and then his buildings shape him. I will now consider the ways in which good behavior can be encouraged in people through better industrial and social design. For example, the 2nd Avenue bus I am riding on is in most respects an adequate vehicle, but it has not been designed with good manners in mind. It has plenty of window space, but the glass is tinted to a shade of such duskiness that the passengers have difficulty in keeping their bearings en route, and spend a lot of time poking past their neighbors and peering through the purple haze to see if they are nearing their stop. The mechanical engineer who chose this shade of glass presumably figured he was doing passengers a favor in shielding them from the occasional ray of the sun, though it would be more polite to permit each passenger to decide for himself if and when he wants solar protection, and then to wear his sunglasses. Perhaps the engineer is a fan of Mr. Eliot, who once spoke of going out into the violet hour. Or perhaps his mother sang Deep Purple to him as a child. Whatever the reasons for all this mandatory mauve, the result is irritation for just about everybody, and serious inconvenience to anyone whose vision is impaired. Tinted glass is not the bus's only design flaw. The windows are constructed in such a way that only a few inches of ventilation are allowed by sliding the front portion of the window to the back or the rear portion to the front, but the openings do not correspond to any of those seats midway between those long windows. This means that at least 1/3 of the passengers on a full bus load do not have the option of having a breeze. Compounding what is already an inconsiderate design, the windows, if opened, direct a blast of air against the person sitting next to the opening, while the person who wants fresh air receives barely a rumor of the ill wind that is blowing him no good. He can tell there is a funneled gust of air coming in by the way in which the hair, let's hope it's not a vulnerable hairpiece, of the person sitting in front is flying and flapping in all directions. As a result of this design, most people seated next to a window keep it closed and want it closed, while the people directly in front and behind are reduced to sweltering in an atmosphere of oppressive humidity and body odors. To make matters even worse, the heating and air conditioning system of the bus has its eccentricities. Either it doesn't work, so that in winter everyone is shivering, or else it overworks, won't stop, and everyone is sweating. In 3 years of living in New York, I have not been lucky enough to find more than the odd bus in which the air conditioning system was working properly. And as many buses are hermetically sealed, and one cannot open any of the windows, some engineer thought that would be a good idea. The failure of an air conditioning system is critical when the temperature soars. None of these irritations are necessary, but they exist because the people responsible for social planning forgot to put the manners program into their computers when their designs were embryonic. These particular failures may not apply to public transportation in every city, but each city has its own peculiar civic hiccups, which contribute to an erosion of manners. In London, the double-decker buses help to prevent the intense overcrowding that one finds on New York buses during rush hours. But many of the routes of the London buses are incomprehensible unless you have lived 20 years in the city, whereas in New York there is a map, easy to follow, posted thoughtfully at practically every bus stop, outlining where you are and where the bus at that stop will be going. In no time one can master the routes, though traffic is often so congested it may take several days to get across town. The subways that are offered for the safety of pedestrians and the efficiency of moving traffic in London alleviate potential for the kind of hit-and-miss pile-ups of cars and people that occur at practically every New York intersection. But many of the subways require a person to climb up and down a lot of steps, and this is hardly a pleasure for those with any of a number of health problems. In certain other cities, such as Montreal and Toronto, the subways are not only quiet and impeccably clean, but, with considerate planning, offer escalators as well as stairs to the public, so that no one need emerge from the underground looking like a miner at day's end in a Newcastle pit. So far I have only mentioned certain modes of public transportation and their defects. The day is only beginning. Everywhere we go in the city, the bank, the post office, the supermarket, and so on, we meet with defects in design that undermine our manners. I do say, that no matter what happens to one in the course of a day, one should try to be forbearing and to wait until you get home to have a good cry. The people in charge of the aesthetic layout of a bank or a department store or a government office have the power to help make our transactions go smoothly and pleasantly, so that our good manners would be given encouragement. Perhaps even more importantly, the policies of banks, stores, and government offices should aim to be as clear, efficient, and polite as possible. No one should be made to feel that he is wasting his own or anyone else's time. Many new stores and offices are constructed with efficiency, economy, and safety in mind, but these considerations, particularly the corners that are cut in the name of economy, are insufficient to construct a comfortable environment which elicits the best possible behavior from people. If one builds an environment for human beings which carelessly adds one frustration to another, then no matter how majestic it looks, or how astronomical the cost, those human beings will resent it, hate it, deface it, and some may even try to destroy it. Designers of buildings and products alike should seek to reduce the social alienation that already exists in most cities by learning more about people as they really are and applying this knowledge to their architecture and their manufacturing. Given, however, that it is often a struggle to get designers to put safety first, we are all familiar with hearing about fires causing more deaths than they might have done due to toxic fumes from plastic materials that should never have been used, but which were cheap. I do not hold out much hope that the concept of promoting good manners through enlightened engineering will sweep through the boardrooms of McDonnell Douglas, Ford, and Mitsubishi in the near future. Rather, like any idea slightly ahead of its time, the burden of its survival falls upon a few concerned individuals. One way of minimizing the pressures of an average day in a big city is to counter-program one's activities, in the parlance of televisionaires, so that when 60% of the population is making a mad dash to the tube, you go shopping instead, and when hordes of whey-faced city dwellers descend upon Hampstead Heath, you stroll round Soho. There is, admittedly, a problem with this theory of crowd avoidance once a city reaches the proportions of a megalopolis, such as Tokyo, London, or New York. For then you will find thousands of people milling about at every hour of the day, and will only have the choice between bad and worse. Still, it is a means of reducing slightly the strain upon one's nervous system, and hence one's manners. Another way in which the individual can improve his manners is by deliberately slowing down. The busier you are, the more your manners will decline, and then you will excuse yourself by saying that you haven't got time for Crispian flourishes, and that people will just have to understand if you take shortcuts in courtesy. I have no time for all this bowing and scraping, you will say to yourself, with an ego as big as Texas. People will just have to get used to me the way I am. This will not do. We are all horrible the way we are, and no one should be asked to put up with our natural selves, or see us as we really are, ever. We must live a life where we do have the time for others. We must reduce our activities so that we are never living at the very edge of our nervous or physical energy. Then we will always have the time to behave nicely. There is no excuse for always being late, for always being on the run, for foolishly allowing yourself to get desperate over anything. It is better to be a polite invalid than someone who enjoys rude health. All situations can be dealt with more successfully with what is called tact and forbearance. The less you get in the habit of expressing irritation, the less you will feel. It is quite untrue that one should get rid of one's aggressions, give way, throw a chair out the window, curse and swear at the least provocation. It only adds to your rage. The same is true of depression. If you go around feeling that no one has ever been as miserable as you, and that you can't be expected to be considerate when you're so miserable, you will not behave well toward others, and neither will they behave well towards you. All you have done is create a pretext for behaving badly. Depression, like most emotions, should be suppressed and endured privately. Show me someone who advocates shameless self-expression, and I'll show you someone with a whim of iron. We live now in a world where protest is virtually unnecessary, but what is so extraordinary is that there are more strikes, more marches and demonstrations in the world than ever before. None at all are needed, for people today have far more latitude in their choices than existed when I was young. When I was a teenager, everything that a person did was liable to be criticized, and there was no worse offense than being unlike other people. Nowadays, this regimental attitude has completely disappeared. A girl may look like a boy, trying to look like a girl, who is trying to look like a boy, and no one cares. There are public orgies down at the docks, and no one cares. No man is penalized for wearing makeup anymore. The habit of indulgent self-expression, as I have rueful cause to know, only leads a person to require ever larger amounts of public attention. Far from encouraging what is most monstrous in us to grow ever larger and stronger, our impatience, our bad temper, we should be concerned with bringing what is most savage in us under control. There are various ways in which you can indicate to people that, although you really like their company, you have your own life to lead, and that they must fit in with it. It is up to you to set the guidelines, so that people will not take advantage of you, and so that you will not be relieved of the temptation to speak badly of them as soon as they leave the room. It is up to you to let people know, early and clearly, what your limits are. For in the present era of great personal freedom, it's more difficult for anyone to decide what are good manners and what aren't. It is not up to me to lay down absolute rules, and it is not up to others to guess what your limits may be. It is up to you to avoid ambiguities in the troublesome areas, such as sex, money, and self-esteem, where there are considerable differences in tolerances and taste, and where, without a clear signal from you, those with whom you socialize are likely to make mistakes. The good habit of being clear will, with some practice, become as much a part of one's second nature as the bad habit of being scatterbrained was in the past. But it must be cultivated with conscious effort. When, for example, you are ordering some item by telephone from a newspaper advertisement or a catalog, you should first write down what it is you wish to order, what serial number it has, your choice of color and style, if that is pertinent, and the number of your account or charge card. Then you can say, with maximum efficiency, when the sales operator answers your call, "Good morning, I would like to order 1 dozen widgets, item 6718, from the hardware department. My account number is 009610... ... and so on." There is no excuse for being unprepared when you place a call. It isn't as if you have been caught off guard by the store calling you. Even when you ring up a friend, I would recommend having pen and paper handy, in the event that you are given some information that needs to be jotted down. Even apart from that exigency, you should draw up a short list of the topics you wish to discuss before placing a call, so that nothing is missed, and you don't waste anyone's time by thinking aloud or trying to remember if there was anything else you wanted to say. You should think before you speak, and it wouldn't hurt to write down a few lines of what you intend to say, so that you develop the habit of speaking concisely and politely, but nevertheless getting to the point. Some of you have no idea how often you say, "you know," or "you see," or "well, and while putting a lot of dead time in their conversation is not technically a breach of manners, it is nevertheless a bad habit and an impediment to smooth social relations. Clear communication is the most important tool of good manners, and anything that can be done to make one more conscious of what one is saying and how one is saying it is likely to improve all of one's social relations. I have no use for swear words as a form of emphasis. I feel, perhaps erroneously, that I can convey my anger without dragging my genitals into the conversation, or the gruesome details of physical processes. I suppose if you can be sure that your audience will in no way be offended, you can say anything you please, but you will have to judge the suitability of what you are about to say by the standards of the weakest member of your audience, so that if someone of 60 is present, your anecdotes will be more discreet, I would think, than if only hot-blooded teenagers are present. And at the other end of the age scale, if someone who is only 12 is present, and he or she is not already a junkie or child prostitute, you restrain your remarks accordingly. The more mixed the company in age, sex, class, and nationality, the more uncertain you will be about what their view of morality is, and the less free you will be to use words or to say things that may give offense. At one time, you could never say anything that referred to your sexual activities at all. Nowadays, a woman may tell you she has the curse, and a man may tell you about his piles. While this is hailed in some quarters as a breakthrough, I fail to see how it advances the art of conversation. When I was young, I remember reading Lady George's Book of Etiquette, which made all sorts of strict stipulations for a morally squeaky clean life, such as the setting up of books by male authors next to books by females is absolutely forbidden. Now the pendulum of what is proper has swung so far the other way that it is not uncommon to be greeted by a most gracious hostess, who surrounds herself with all the accoutrements of the New Yorker lifestyle, with the words, "You know what I need is a good fuck." When people say things like that, they do so to show that they can, although there are at least 10 better ways of conveying their meaning. They do not intend necessarily to offend, shock, or titillate, but to express an image they have of themselves as totally free, uninhibited bohemians. These Anglo-Saxon oinks and grunts are the verbal equivalent of wearing gaudy clothes. It's amazing how vain some people are over what they look like, but how vacant they are about what they sound like. People are more likely to forgive you for uttering expletives under stress than for decorating an ordinary conversation with obscenities. A steady diet of the shortest words for the longest things is never a good idea, for you may give offense, which is bad manners, and you will certainly make your conversation monotonous, which is bad style. A lot of people know perhaps 5,000 words and only use about 2,000 of them in their entire conversation. They feel somewhat at a loss to say how amazing something was, how annoying something was, how terrifying, how wonderful, so they include words which they feel add something, but which in fact add nothing. Whenever I hear the word fuck, I hear it often not so much applied to sex, but preposterously to such things as traffic lights that have turned red, vending units that won't work, pay telephones that won't telephone or pay. This usually strikes me as an impoverishment of language. It is hard to say what is being insulted more, sexual functions or mechanical dysfunctions, but what comes across, even more clearly, is that the person is not really connecting well within his own brain. His language has taken on a ruttish life of its own. It is no longer the flexible tool of a reflective mind. One of the reasons why people talk and behave in an ill-mannered fashion is that at the age of 16 or 17, they get into the defiance racket and never get out. This usually happens because they were taught manners, along with everything else, by a rudely authoritarian teacher of the do-as-I-say, not-as-I-do variety, the kind who unconsciously incites his students to lifelong rebellion. I can remember when I was at school that we boys often felt that we were being made fun of by our teachers, who seized every opportunity to humiliate us. Our tone of voice was mimicked. The teacher would say, "Please, sir, what is it?" in a whiny voice of gross exaggeration. This was quite unnecessary, and we grew up to be rude and ruined, warped and defiant. What children need is not bland praise, but astute guidance in a form that doesn't make them feel inadequate. I have known teachers who, when a student hands in a piece of, say, artwork and says, "It still isn't right, I'm afraid," pounce immediately, with the full force of their authority, and reply, "No, it isn't right, for the simple reason that you haven't done what I told you to do." It would be much better for the teacher to say, "Perhaps I didn't make myself quite clear. You must look at the sky more carefully. Now, do you really think it's the same shade of blue from end to end?" And when the tiny student of tiny talent says, "Yes," the teacher may point out, "Doesn't that bit on the horizon seem a bit paler?" The student squints and dawdles, but after a second look says, "Oh yes, it is a bit paler." Then the teacher says, "I suggest you include this new observation in your work." And then the pupil goes back and erases and changes the drawing and will be pleased that he is doing things better. One should teach people things indirectly so that they seem to discover what they need to know for themselves, rather than reducing them to tears for not memorizing what they have been taught. I would never be unkind to children, and I certainly wouldn't scold them. If we want the young to be well behaved, it is up to us, who are older, to set a cheerful and benign example. Only dogs should be sent to obedience school, and that is because dogs, particularly German shepherds, have all read Mein Kampf and love to follow leaders. In the rearing of children, as in any crisis, the words "because I say so" are insulting. As with adults, so with a child, it is impolite to discuss with him, or even in his presence, any subject for which no explanation is on offer. What young people find so detestable about their elders is not their sins, but their secrets and their smugness. I suppose that no one knows the true meaning of ambivalence until they have had a child, or anything else small and cuddly, pukey and poopy, that is totally dependent upon one for its well-being when young, but can't wait to be old enough to bite the hand that feeds it. I recommend keeping one's life as uncomplicated as possible. I don't even like to have plants around the house demanding, "Feed me, feed me." But I recognize that most human beings feel compelled to have little carbon units to whom they can pass on their ignorance, and so that the traditions of chronic poverty will not be broken. And where will it all end? We might even ask ourselves where it will all begin. A pregnant woman asked fate only that her child should be well-mannered. Unbeknown to her, she was carrying twins. They were never born because they stood forever at the exit from her womb, the one saying, "After you, Claude," while his brother said, "No, after you, Cecil." While it is theoretically possible to be too self-effacing, in the world in which we live, our precarious lives, it is unlikely that anyone will ever suffer from an excess of differentiality. Crisp's general rule: if you can't beat them, join them. If you can't join them, grovel. The greatest difficulty lies in deciding where kindness ends and good manners begin. We are never accused of displaying bad manners in our treatment of animals, but we may be accused of unkindness. There was even a time when we could not be accused of bad manners towards our servants, and before that, when no one could be accused of cruelty towards a slave. Manners do not grow in mountainous country. Manners are for the plains, where no one is above or below us, and indeed the well-mannered treat all people as their equals. When I was young, the guides to good behavior instructed readers how to behave by offering absolute rules of etiquette, although few were as extreme as the following. A boy should blow his nose with a handkerchief in the presence of a superior. He should not wet his tongue with his lips, should not sit with his legs apart, or scratch himself, or clean his teeth with his knife. He should not throw gristle under the table, and not feed other people's dogs when dining with them. Should wipe the wine cup before passing it on. Even when undressing alone, remember that the angels dislike the exposure of private parts. This is actually from a text by Catherine of Aragon, which had gone through 120 editions by 1780. Such edicts will strike the modern reader as ridiculous. It is the fate of all guides to good manners to be laughed at eventually, particularly those that are not intentionally funny. If it may be said that this book makes a modest contribution to the literature of manners, I hope it will be in the form of reversing the usual response of readers of laughing at the moral earnestness of the author, by their taking seriously what is presented lightly. Even with paradoxes, there is a better or worse way for responses to run. Remember, great stylists do not surround themselves with dullards. Good conversation stimulates better conversation. Wit provokes wit. Even if a small portion of the charm and grace which you cultivate in yourself rubs off on others through your transactions, the tone of society will be raised that much more, and all of our lives will be enhanced. There are in our midst nuclear nihilists who say that because mankind is threatened with extinction, nothing matters anymore. Anything goes. What the hell? But in fact, it is all the more important for us to make an effort to climb to the highest rung of civilization that we are capable of reaching. So every day out there, in the hack and stab world, when you tip your hat and say something kind, you have at least joined the forces of people who are trying to make life bearable and better, as opposed to those who don't give a damn and steadily make matters worse. Give us this day our daily struggle, and with any luck, our manners will triumph. That's the end of the book. And I do thank you for listening.